Welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter, and this episode is a great one. I mean it. As always, I mean it. But really, this episode is a little bit of a shift of focus, maybe from prior episodes, but in a good way. It's all good. This episode is focusing on mental health. That's the focus. And I want to be really clear, and it's clear in the episode, and I want to clarify and solidify now that we're focusing on mental health, not mental suffering or mental dis-ease, but mental health, mental well-being. And that has been our guest's Dr. William F. Pettit Jr. That has been his focus for decades, focusing on mental health, not mental disease, not mental illness. So Dr. Pettit has a long history of practicing psychiatry. He was trained, conventionally, and in the last few decades has come into a totally radical approach to psychiatry. And this approach is really based on the three principles as were kind of laid out by Sid Banks, who is referenced several times throughout the episode. And I'll put links to all of this stuff in the show notes on alter.health/podcast. But Dr. Pettit, took off from conventional practice of psychiatry to really take this three principles approach. And in doing so, he has experienced and witnessed such radical, I guess one might call them miracles of healing when it comes to mental health. People coming into their inherent mental well-being, as he would put it. So I just want to give a really brief introduction, a really brief bio for Dr. Pettit. He graduated from the Creighton University, Omaha, Nebraska, and the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Chicago. He completed his psychiatric residency at the Philadelphia Naval Regional Medical Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Portsmouth Naval Regional Medical Center in Portsmouth, Virginia. He is board certified in psychiatry and has previously been board certified in adolescent psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and addiction medicine. Dr. Pettit served as a physician in the United States Navy for over 9 years, including 3 years as a U.S. Naval flight surgeon and 3 years as chief of psychiatry of the U.S. Naval Nuclear Submarine Base in Grayton, Connecticut. Presently, Dr. Pettit holds an appointment as adjunct clinical professor at Creighton University School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. Formerly, Dr. Pettit has held adjunct faculty positions at a number of medical schools across the country. Currently, but presently, Dr. Pettit practices telepsychiatry 2 mornings a week. And he also does 3 principles consultations and teachings nationally and internationally. He is dedicating scheduled time to writing a book called Stories of Hope, One Cause, One Cure. So, like I kind of laid out for you, this is a conversation on the 3 principles and what Dr. Pettit calls chronic mental stress, which he really sees as the underlying cause, the one cause of all this mental suffering that we see in the world today. And most importantly, Dr. Pettit lays down the solution, lays down the opportunity very clearly and very directly. How can we come into our, inherent mental well-being and also physical well-being? And it might shock you, but I won't spoil the surprise because there's a lot more to it than this, but it's literally one thought away. your mental well-being is one thought away. And that's really my takeaway from this conversation. And that's a profound, profound insight, that in any moment, I can choose my mental health. So just let that sink in, and obviously let the next hour and 15 minutes or so with Dr. Bill Pettit sink in. So before we dive in, just a reminder, if you enjoy this episode and others, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share with anyone who you feel may be, helped or supported through listening to this content. And as always, sit back, relax, enjoy, take a breath. Here we go with Dr. So here we are. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Alter Your Health. And today's guest is Dr. Bill Pettit, who is has a lot of amazing experience and wisdom to share in the world of mental health, coming from a very radical perspective than maybe his conventional training would otherwise have it. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Pettit.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
it's good to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so looking.
I should say Dr. Alter myself too. If you're going to call
Pettit.
me names, if you're going to call me names, I get to call you names.
All right, I'll take it. I'll take whatever I'm called.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely. I know that we were just already talking about how you've got about 15 hours of information that you could share, probably without even taking a breath. But we'll kind of fly over this, and I'd love to start with obviously who you are more thoroughly and how you came into your view of mental health as it is today. And yeah.
And I'll try to be succinct, without hurrying. And so if I get sped up, feel free to give me the choke sign or the slow down sign or something. And but my name is Bill Pettit, William F. Pettit Jr., legal name. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm actually have my 76th birthday coming up here in about 10 days. And
All right.
What's amazing, Ben, is I feel younger inside than at 70, almost 76, than I did at 41, when I was burdened by a lot of attention to thoughts that weighed me down. And so briefly, who I am, I was born in the Midwest, oldest of 6 children, and from a fairly religious family. And but I don't know if it was necessarily spiritual. It was more about dogma, I think. And I ended up had 2 years of junior college. Actually, was in a seminary and was considering becoming a Trappist monk. When they did psychological testing and said that there was no way that I could tolerate being cooped up in their monastery, and there was no way their monastery could tolerate having me cooped up in their monastery. So that ended the Trappist monk, and I worked for a year, and then had an insight one time that I did want to be a healer of some sort, a physical healer, and I went off to Creighton University and did my pre-med and graduated from the University of Illinois in 1969 in medical school, and actually was going to be a heart surgeon, and was on 2 years of general surgery residency, and 36 on and 12 off. I was exhausted, and I put in my resignation halfway through the second year to give them a chance to fill that slot. I was then drafted into the Vietnam War as a physician. I had been delayed for my surgery residency, but since I didn't complete it. And I spent 3 years as a family doctor for a squadron of naval pilots and their families. Actually was trained to be on an aircraft carrier, but scored high enough in my class and had not known my wife hardly, because I was on 36 out of 48 hours for 2 years, that I got a land-based squadron. And while I was a family doctor, if you will, for the aviators and their families, I became interested for the first time in psychiatry. I started to see how much people's state of mind, their state of ease or dis-ease, as I've come to see it, or mental stress or activation of the HPA, what in medicine you call the HPA axis, the stress response, to the degree that people were at peace versus not, had a tremendous effect not only on their mood, on their level of tension, on their ability to sleep, on whether they had chronic pain, and literally, because of what we've learned about inflammation, a vast, probably 80 to 120 at least, physical diagnoses, physical illnesses that were related to the chronic state of stress. And that, I think, got me interested in psychiatry, along with my own, if you will, my own lack of understanding that allowed me sometimes to feel like I was a nice person, and other times, if from an outside observer, I wouldn't even want to have me as a neighbor. And I was puzzled by that. How does that happen? And so I did my psychiatry training and was chief of psychiatry in the Navy, and was chief of psychiatry of the nuclear submarine base, and for 3 years, from 80 to 77 to 80. And I got disillusioned with psychiatry, Ben. I saw that the medicines could sometimes relieve people's tension, and or if they were hearing voices, it might make that calmer and maybe even take the voices away. But I never saw anybody find peace of mind from a pill. And I wanted more than just to be alleviating suffering. I wanted to bring people. I don't know that I even knew then that every human being had perfect mental well-being inside of them. I don't know. But I knew that I wanted more than I was seeing. And I wanted to at least look and see if there was more. Mm. And I ended up working for a company out of California. And I traveled around the country doing what they called back in the early 80s, adult experiential education. And some people there have probably heard of EST and the forum. And the company that I was with was to EST as Avis was to Hertz. Wasn't quite as big, but it was fairly big. And I traveled all around the United States doing these trainings for 3 years. I became the national program director. And it was during that time that I met a psychologist named Dr. George Pransky, who actually did not have his PhD at the time, I don't think. But I heard that people were he was in Oakland, and people were bringing their hopeless cases, themselves or relatives, to him. And the word was out, got through the Bay Area, that more often than not, something dramatic was happening, that people were having cures even. You just didn't hear that word in the mental health field. And I was puzzled and intrigued. And I started going to Friday night lectures that he did over at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. And he'd rent a room and people would come. And I started getting really intrigued. I did not understand what he was talking about, but I think there's a place within us, Ben, that knows truth when it hears it, even if the intellect doesn't understand it.
Absolutely. I know I've had that experience so many times in my life where it's like, I don't know if this is true, but I do know. I don't know in my head if this is true, but I know in my body that this is true.
Yeah. I don't know the specifics, but I know there's truth here.
Yeah.
And I think the opposite is true. And I doubt if I'll offend your listeners, but I think we have a little meter. I think it's made of styrofoam. No, I'm just kidding. But that either goes to the right truth or it goes to the left bullshit,
Totally. I mean, exactly. I mean, I know I'll read a scientific study, published in a journal, and I'll just say, bullshit meter, bullshit flag just waves, and it's science.
Absolutely.
It's peer reviewed, it's, accepted, but it's not the truth,
Right. right. And that goes to a whole nother discussion of what
Yeah.
is a paradigm. Because a paradigm is a set of beliefs that you do your research to support. You
Yeah.
look at the results based on the paradigm that you already believe to be true, and you interpret it in that way.
Yeah. We're kind of stuck in this self-created,
Right.
universe. Yeah.
And once there's a paradigm shift, you can look at the same research from a new level of understanding, and you go, "Holy cow, how did we miss this?"
Yep.
And there was the silly movie Aladdin, with Robin Williams, and I don't know if you remember, Gilbert Gottfried was the parrot, and his famous line was, "Why am I not surprised?" And I used to love that. His voice was so grating, but I really, my hope is to get my blog started within the next month, which is going to be showing research, a lot of it done during that time of those 15 podcasts, and showing the research from a three principles perspective, scientific research, and show that what it shows if you see the truth. And it's going to be entitled, "Why Am I Not Surprised?" Because a lot of the research that they come up with, they're surprised by, they don't know how to interpret the results. They say this needs further study.
Yeah.
But if you understand the principles behind it, you see that it's very clear what it's pointing to. But
For
anyway,
sure. So yeah, you've kind of given a background on how you came to find George Pransky, who was a practitioner of three principles at the time.
he was learning from Mr. Banks.
Yeah, and you also mentioned this concept that stuck in my mind, which is, um, in perfect mental health or perfect
That every human being
every
has perfect mental well-being inside of them.
every human being has perfect mental well-being. So could you, yeah, maybe it's a good opportunity to just like explain. It's I feel like I can walk down the street and say, just question that, like, is
Sure,
that
sure.
person really perfectly mentally well?
Yes, yeah.
So
And
yeah.
and I'd like to quote something, and it's a book that I'm going to ask people to think seriously. It's a short little book by Mr. Banks, Sydney Banks. The man was my mentor for 26 years, and it's called The Missing Link. It's 142 pages, and as I shared earlier, it's so powerful that there's spaces between about every three or four words, 3 or 4 lines. And so here's what he says at the end of the first chapter. The great mystics of the world, he talks about how the divine passes from the formless to the form. And as human beings, we're both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. This is very short. The great mystics of the world who tried to explain such knowledge had no choice but to speak in metaphors. Knowing their words were only representation of the spiritual wisdom, which is formless, right? How do you use form to describe formlessness? We're only a representation of the spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. The next short paragraph is in italics, which I think doesn't mean listen harder. I think his goal is to say listen quieter. All human psyches, it's quite a bold statement, are rooted in universal truth. And no person's psyche is better than any other's. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. So this has evolved for me in 35 years, and I'm going to say it very simply, and people's either their meters will go one way or the other. There is one cure to mental illness. It is love and understanding. And there is one cause of mental illness. It is love without understanding. Now, that's a strange statement. And I'm going to take it to real world. On my flight recently I spent 20 days back in the Midwest doing some work and being with family and doing some work, etc. And on my plane flight, I had the choice of watching two movies. One was all the superheroes were going to fight all the bad forces in the world. And that looked like it might be fun. And then this movie caught my attention. It said, "Thank you for your service." And it was the story of 5 veterans that came back from Iraq and their journey back home and what happened. And I won't go into details. You can imagine, probably write the script yourself, and being told they need to wait for 6 months for an appointment while they're, and what I saw, because my wife had, my second wife, my late wife passed away, and I've been with my present wife for 15 years, Linda, Dr. Pettit, and she one time asked Sid, she said, "Sid, is love enough? People talk about love being the curative force in the world." And he got real quiet and he said, "Love and understanding is enough." And what I saw, Ben, as I watched this movie, "Thank You for Your Service," these men that came back from Iraq that had all been in the same unit, they had tremendous love in their hearts. Not only for each other. I mean, they had carried, some of them had carried one of their other mates that from a gun that had gotten gunned down, even though he weighed 30 pounds more than him, picked them up and carried them to safety. And they had tremendous love for each other. They returned to fiancés and to wives and children that they loved tremendously in their heart, but they didn't have understanding. They didn't have understanding of their true nature as a spiritual being, and they didn't have understanding of how they were creating their experience, literally one thought at a time from the inside out. And they didn't know that memories, no matter how many special effects they had, were just thoughts and were not reality in the present moment. So even though love was there, that lack of understanding led them to all sorts, punching holes in walls, acts of violence, acts of self-violence. I think we have a veteran dying by suicide every 22 seconds. That's what I've heard. I know from Vietnam, we had 58,000 we lost in the field. 20 years ago, there were over 300,000 suicides.
Wow.
So
yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a question popped up to clarify what you're sharing. So understanding is not necessarily understanding love, but understanding who we are, like self-awareness.
What we really are as human beings.
Yeah. So that level of kind of spiritual self-awareness of our, our presence as a divine being having a human experience.
Yeah. And to make it practical, for at least when I was young, the physicists used to claim that before the Big Bang occurred, that there was a little bit of matter somewhere. They'd say things like, really would set my bullshit meter off. Well, the whole universe came from something that was 1/1,000,000th the size of the top of a pinhead. Okay, that sounds like bullshit. It was hard for them to finally, and my understanding from talking to some physicists at a university, that they now would, most of them would say there was no form. There was a formless, before the Big Bang, you say, why is this relevant to what we just talked about? To me, it's purely relevant. Before the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, there was a formless energy, formless intelligent energy. In fact, I would even say, from looking at human beings, a formless intelligent energy that was pure love and pure understanding. Why do I say that? Because I think if you see human beings at their best, you're seeing a reflection of what they're made of. That just seems logical to me.
Yeah. And, I've brought this up to you before. And it all always resonates as truth with me when you share something like that, because I understand that on a physical level inside the body, purely when we're talking about purely physical healing, the body is always healing.
Right.
Every symptom that we experience in the world is an expression of our body's attempt towards achieving health and
Absolutely.
wholeness on a
Absolutely.
physical level. And you are you're going obviously on a holistic, universal level of, within the mind, within consciousness, that we all have this organizational understanding of our true nature hidden within us, and we've kind of become separated or delusioned and can't find it at times.
Yeah, we've created an illusion or a delusion that we're separate.
Yeah.
And even Mr. Banks would say, and I would say too, that some people think the God is inside and then the body is something else. Well, it's not. It's just the same energy in a different disguise.
Mm-hmm.
Even Einstein. So you've got this great nothingness that the African tradition is. There was this great nothingness. Now people put labels on that, Ben. Right?
Sure.
We put labels. They call it God because we need a label. They could have called it Dave. They could have called it Charlie, Mo, or Larry. But
Yeah.
people call it that, and then they attach a whole bunch of other stuff to it,
The
and then they
dogma.
kill each other over it.
Yeah.
So I don't care. I'm going to call that universal mind. There was no form, and there's universal mind, and then creation starts. Universal thought brings the formlessness into form, and it can be made of only one thing: the formless energy that was there before the form.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to call that universal mind, you can say, yes, universal mind is everywhere. It is everywhere. It's omnipresent because that's all there is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our intellect has trouble wrapping around that, but that's what Mr. Banks saw, not just with his intellect. He saw it powerfully, and it changed his life from being a welder with a ninth grade education who'd worked 14 years in the pulp mill and had been born illegitimate to a teenage girl in Scotland and had a ninth grade education and come over to Canada and read 4 welding books in its entire life, and ended up talking to PhD physicists from MIT for 3 days and having them invite him back, ask the human resource director at British Air Electronics twice to invite him back for 3 more days to teach them physics. PhD physicist from MIT, this man who'd read 4 welding books in his entire life, something profound. If we say that Einstein got to peek into the mind of God, or whatever you want to call that, to see relativity, Mr. Banks was allowed to peek in, and he had much less preparation for what he saw than Einstein had.
Yeah, and you might even go as far to argue that having the lack of preparation, as you put it, allowed him to be open to see and experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So universal mind gives rise to thought.
Yeah.
And those are 2 of the principles.
2 of the 3 principles.
Yeah.
And universal consciousness is the gift of awareness and the level of understanding. You can use consciousness as 2 different ways, because we can't. I heard somebody one time, they asked me a question about 2002 when I was at the medical school at West Virginia, and people said, so universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness. And we were explaining that every human being is those. We're made of that, because everything is made of that. Only unlike the chair or the table, we have consciousness, so we can be a spectator and not just a participant in this experience. So we're using mind, thought, and consciousness, what we're made of, to create our experience. Every moment of our life, we're making a movie. One thought at a time, from birth to death, we are making a movie from the inside out. And people have thought, I thought for 41 years of my life, that the movie was being forced on me from the outside in. And I'll take us back. I want to say one thing. I think it was in 2000, about 2 or 3 years ago, that two physics labs from opposite sides of the world won the Nobel Prize in Physics, showing that creation is actually accelerating.
I think I heard about this.
How do you wrap your mind around that? I guess our intellect goes, where is it accelerating into? Right?
Yeah.
Into the nothingness, right?
Yeah,
What the hell is that, right?
From nothing to more nothing, yeah.
Right. So it's accelerating. It's going faster. It's not like something set off 13.8 billion years ago that's now kind of slowing down. It's literally accelerating. So creation is ongoing. Okay. So we're creating this experience. So moment to moment, we're using mind, thought, and consciousness to create our life from the inside out. Now, without understanding, I went through first 41 years of my life thinking that my experience was coming from the outside in. And I had very little understanding, such that at 41, when I went to, George Pransky said, come with about 200 people to listen to Mr. Sidney Banks this weekend. He's just a gentle man who's had a very powerful experience, and it's changed my life, and it's changed my ability to help people. I said, okay, well, I'm in. And I went there. It was April Fool's Day, 1983. Really, isn't it? The universe, whoever's behind the universe has a sense of humor. There is no doubt in my mind. And I'm sitting there. I am 41 years old. I've been in physician for 14 years. I've been in psychiatry nearly 10 years. And I've been going in and out of clinical depression for 21 years. Never hospitalized, but I saw 6 different psychiatrists. And they were nice people, Ben, and their hearts were in the right place. But not one of them had understanding such that they could point to me how to live in the only thing that exists, the present, with a light heart, moment to moment. No one even pointed me in that direction. So I'm sitting there going in and out of clinical depression for 21 years. They call me, I'm board certified. In fact, now I have been board certified in 5 different psychiatry subspecialties, but then I was just board certified in psychiatry and neurology, it was a combined thing. And they called me a mental health professional. And in my years of training, I figured out one time, it's give or take 40 or 50, I had about 800 lectures in my residency on mental illness or medications to relieve the pain of mental illness. I had 0 lectures, Ben, on mental health. 0.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it reminds me of the physical body medical school, caring for the physical body.
Absolutely.
We studied pathology to the end of the world, and we understand we understand pathology, but we really don't understand how to, tap into the body and its ability to regain its health.
Or into the spirit, which can help the body regain its health.
Oh yeah. Well, of course, the mind-body connection. Yeah.
I sat with Deepak Chopra one time in 1998 for 45 minutes. And he showed me, this is 20 years ago, he showed me a log that he had, that he was getting from all over the world, and a place in Japan was getting from all over Asia. And between the two, the place in Japan, the center, and his center in La Jolla, California, they had 9,000 cases of spontaneous cures from metastatic cancer.
Yeah, That's always fascinating to me, all of these because we think about it as being some miraculous, it is a miracle, but we think about it as happening, 1 in a billion or something, but it
Right.
happens more often than we know it, and we just
R-
don't have the documentation.
Right. And
Yeah.
my point is, we don't have the time to tell the stories maybe today, but my point is, when you hear things that look like miracles, is it the rule, and is it the exception to the rule, or is it the rule in action?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is it the rule in action with sufficient understanding? So I asked Deepak, I said, because he wasn't really interested in the three principles. He had his framework that was working for him with the meditation twice a day and the Ayurvedic medicine, and I respected that. But I asked him, I said, what was there anything common to these cures? I mean, they had slides of metastases to the different organs. They were all, it was good science. He was a board certified endocrinologist,
Mm.
and so he said yes. I wish I had the recording, but what I remember him saying was, every one of these people that had this experience had an incredibly powerful experience in the moment of realizing they were divine energy. Not intellectually, like I have, but a true experience that's what they were. And with that level of clarity, of knowing with a capital K, those cells could no longer exist in the state they were in.
Right.
They
Right.
could.
Because with the knowing of, I don't know, with that sort of
Right.
enlightened perspective,
Right.
it puts everything into place, and then you understand, I've had this conversation with others, that you understand that the cancer in the body or the disease process is not something to fight. It's just a natural occurrence that's moving through the body. So you don't put your hatred or againstness towards the disease process, but rather you understand it. Like you were saying, you're loving with understanding
Right.
of what's going on. Yeah.
Right. And sadly, and this is tricky to talk about, because
Yeah.
when we talk about chronic mental stress, it's really, with a lack of understanding of the principles behind life, we innocently create stress with the power of thought that we've been given, and we activate. One of the things. Well, let me go back to the question that I brought up. Somebody said to me in 2002. They said, "Why do you say that these three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness? Why do you say that they're just truth? Why don't you say they're a theory?" It was a good question, and I didn't have the answer. My colleague Judy Sedgman, who's a wonderful, and she'd be a wonderful interview too, brilliant lady. She got quiet and she said, "Well, when you think about it, these principles, they're a metaphor. You can't grab. They're formless. The power of thought you can't grab. You can see the results of it, in the body electrically and biochemically. You can't grab mind. You can't grab consciousness. They're spiritual. They're formless, but they're real. We're connected to something that allows us to be alive. And along with that, then we have this power of thought that we can create thoughts with. And then we have the ability to be conscious of what we think and have it look real to us. Okay? Mm-hmm. So she said, really, when you think about it, these three principles are before a theory. Because in order to form a theory, make up a theory, you have to have the power of mind. You have to have the power of thought. You have to have the power and gift of consciousness to be able to make a theory.
I love that. So the three principles are pre-theoretical.
They're pre-theoretical. They're pre-form.
Pre-theoretical. Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't matter.
It's trying to point to the source, to what a principle is, something that speaks to basic truth. right?
Hmm.
With a capital T. And it's interesting, the founder of American Psychology, and I always block on his name. Do you remember who I'm talking about? He actually was an MD, but he's known as the founder. But he always, in 1902 or something, he said, someday someone will see principles there will be no longer 300 different theories, that they will see the unifying principles of human experience.
Yeah, and this seems to be a common theme in my world recently. That the truth is always simple, like Occam's razor, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
It's always the most simplest um, theory, or the most simplest path is going to be the right path, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
certainly truth has a simplicity to it.
yeah.
And Sid, some people would even come to Sid and they'd say, I'd listen to you if you didn't make it say that it was so simple. Oh, he said, so if I kind of tried to make it complicated, then you'd listen to it.
Yeah, well, and it's important, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I believe that there's a huge distinction between simplicity and being easy.
Yes.
Simplicity is simple, but that's not to say that the full awareness and full understanding of a concept is easy to accomplish. It
I get,
takes it,
yeah.
and by that I mean
Yeah.
it takes time. It takes a deepening to fully comprehend the nature of the simplicity.
No, there's truth in what you're saying.
Yeah.
And yet, if I were to go the other way, I'd say that here's the opening lines from The Missing Link.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the greatest misconceptions ever is the belief that it takes years to find wisdom. Many experience.
I stand corrected.
Well, no, but then I'm gonna take your side in a minute.
Yeah.
I'm gonna argue both sides. Okay, are you with me?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Is this okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Many experience time, few experience wisdom. The achievement of mental stability and peace of mind is one thought away from everyone on earth. If you can find that.
That's a good reminder. Yeah.
Throughout time, human beings have experienced insights that spontaneously and completely, those powerful words, and completely change their behavior and their lives, bringing them happiness they previously had thought impossible. Finding wisdom has nothing to do with time. Achieving mental stability is a matter of finding healthy thoughts from moment to moment. Such thoughts can be light years away or a second away. Powerful.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that, because I think I need to remember that. I need to remember that I sometimes I think about the journey. There's like this concept of the hero's journey, or a spiritual journey.
Sure.
As
Joseph Campbell and
as it's just this, it's a journey, but at the same time, in any moment when we are fully present, we are at the destination of the journey.
Right.
Yeah.
But so now I'll take the other side, because
Yeah.
here's what Sid also says. He said, understanding the nature of these principles, there is an infinite number of doors of understanding into the nature of these three principles.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people, last I looked, that's in my math book, that is a really big number.
Yeah, well, my interpretation of that is, for as many people as there are to hear about the three principles, that's as many interpretations as there are.
Right. And what he's speaking of, I think even more though, is, remember, we started with love with understanding, love without understanding. I think there's all levels of understanding.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And for me, for 35 years, literally every 6 months of my life, internally has gotten gentler. And really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're frozen here. We were frozen for a moment there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we were frozen in a good spot. We were frozen in the beauty of your life.
Yeah, in every moment. So, so when people say to me, "Don't you ever experience emotional pain?" And I say, "Yeah, I do." But I know that I know the only person that can create emotional pain for me is in the same underbritches that I'm in. And the last I looked, there's only room for me.
Yeah.
So that's not a belief. I just know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm in emotional pain, I know that I get excited because the Chinese symbol, as I understand it, for crisis is two symbols put together. One is danger. The other is opportunity. When I get caught in emotional pain, I know that I can either go the direction that I went for 41 years of my life, or at least those 21 years I was in depression. I can go to analysis, rational analysis, or I can allow my mind to quiet and trust that the divine wisdom that I'm made of will rise to the surface and guide me. That I am guided by a spiritual force every moment of my life. I think we talked about this. I love Einstein's quote, so many of them, but I love his quote where he says, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational analytical mind, its faithful servant. However, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So
love that
when
one.
I am lost in pain, emotional pain, I know that if I go to analysis, I'm not only just going to go around in a circle, it's going to be like a tunnel headed down. But if I allow my mind to quiet and just listen for a positive feeling, just listen in that quieter state, every single time in my life, the last 35 years that I've had the courage to do that, a positive feeling has returned, and with it has the wisdom and insight to go beyond what I was tripped up by.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, that insight that I gained was something that I needed a few months down the road, or maybe the next day. So tripping over it here allowed me to go through to a few more doors of insight so that I was prepared to deal with something unexpected that happened a week, a month, a year later.
Yeah.
Does that resonate? Or
Absolutely. And I do have some kind of follow-up clarifications. I know we kind of flew by chronic mental stress,
I can go back to that.
and I want to go back to it. And I also want to tweeze out the distinction between chronic mental stress and what you were talking about just now of, emotional pain,
Right.
what the difference is and how,
Okay.
chronic mental stress becomes, I think you've called it the ultimate cause of mental illness
And much physical
and
illness.
much physical
Yeah. Yeah.
illness. Yeah. So,
So let's do the emotional pain first. It is good if I accidentally place my hand on a hot burner on the stove that was left on. It is really good that I immediately feel very sharp pain.
yeah, that's the
Because of
body's
that,
protecting itself. Yeah.
I pull it off, and I have limited tissue damage to my hand.
Yeah.
There's actually a disease that you may know of called syringomyelia, where people do not have those pain receptors. So that person, if they accidentally did that, would not know that their hand was burning until they smelled the burning flesh.
Mm-hmm.
It is good that I feel pain. It
Right.
is good that I feel emotional pain. We haven't got the time to talk about it. It's in my, if people go to the website that Linda and I have, the newly launched website, thedoctorspettit.com, THEDRS, PET. I know you're going to give that.
Yeah.
And then the Real Change portal that I go into depth of this. But the first thing that happens psychologically when we get caught up and we're paying attention and we activate the stress response in our body, we have the equivalent of this pain when you put your hand on the hot burner. Our mood goes down. It's a gift that our mood goes down when we're misusing the power and gift of thought. It is a gift that we experience more tension, more anxiety. It is a gift that we then usually start having pain because our threshold for pain lowers considerably, and we experience pain at levels where other people in a healthy state of mind do not experience pain. And then it affects our sleep, and then it affects our memory, and then we're having panic attacks, and then we're having anger outbursts, and then we're feeling disconnected. And the higher level of understanding, the sooner you realize when you're off the glide path, speaking in aviation terms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the Far Side cartoon. I know, you've seen those, even though it was before your time?
Sure, I remember the Far Side, yeah.
Yeah. Well, sadly, I remember one that I thought was funny, but I mean, as long as you don't take it literal, these two pilots are flying this big 747, and one turns to the other and he says, "Boy, you usually don't see goats up this high." Well, 2 seconds later, they crashed into the mountain.
Uh-huh.
Now, why do I say that is poignant? Because that's where I lived until I met Mr. Banks. I often did not know that I was creating this tremendous amount of physical and biological dysregulation until I completely crashed. Either totally destroyed a relationship, or was flat on my back with an infection, or with my back coming out. Since 30 years ago, I have 2 discs in my back that are bulging. I used to have chronic pain from that when I was 30 years younger. At 75, I don't. I'm sure you know that research that shows that if you take 100 people off the street with no back pain, 50% of them will have bulging discs.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at chronic stress. When we get into a stressful state of mind, now at a cellular level, many people have read Bruce, with The Biology of Belief, right?
Bruce Lipton, yeah.
Yeah, and he sees at a cellular level, even second to second, what happens in the cells. At a little bigger level, they've shown with activation studies since the 1980s, late 1980s, that if you have volunteers hooked up to fMRIs and PET scans, and you have them think upsetting thoughts voluntarily after you get a baseline for 3 minutes, every single time, even if they're thinking about when their dog died when they were 9, they activate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. They activate a stress system that is meant for life-threatening emergencies. And it's meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for a maximum of 30 minutes. I don't know if you've read White Zebras Don't Get Ulcer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with kind
it's
of.
Really, he's funny. He's brilliant. He's a researcher at Stanford.
Yeah.
And it takes each one of the, he says, you know, this was meant for our ancestors to have a chance against a saber-toothed tiger with nothing but a club, a wooden club. And so there's massive outpouring of norepinephrine. There's massive outpouring of epinephrine. There's massive discharge of glucose into the bloodstream. Every molecule of glucagon that gets released from the liver releases 10 to the 8th molecules of glucose into the bloodstream. And then we wonder why our people's pancreases are giving out, and we have an epidemic in the last 20 years of type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Cortisol massively. Mm-hmm. The inflammatory response, it's a SWAT team. It's a 5-stage SWAT team that goes into any any injury to the body, and it is powerful. But if it stays for more than 30 minutes, it starts killing innocent bystanders.
Yeah.
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 And you knock out the sex hormones, you knock out the growth hormones, you knock out 40 to 70%, Sapolsky would say, your immune system to fight cancers and infections. Why? Because if that saber-toothed tiger eats you, you're not going to have to worry about having sex, getting cancer, or growing. You need all of your resources to deal with this threat. But if that threat is made up worry about whether there's going to be a layoff at the factory, or your mom's breast cancer, or your dad's alcoholism, or your grandson's cocaine habit, you're activating the same system. And it's going to destroy you in one way or the other. Now, it's not destruction, really. A lot of the physical and psychiatric symptoms that we call evil, bad things, they're not. To me, they're universal mind trying to give us a head slap and wake us up, like the rumble strips on the side of the road, that when we start to fall asleep and headed for the ditch to flip over and possibly die, and we hit the rumble strip and they wake us up. So to me, universal mind is always trying to wake us up. And I'd like to make a couple of dramatic things. We can't go through the whole DSM-5, but bipolar disorder. I've started asking in the last 2 years people that have had manic and hypomanic episodes, and I've asked them this question: do you remember at the time before you flipped into, what's the last thing you remember before you flipped into the manic episode or the hypomanic episode? What do you remember about that time? And the ones that do remember, which is about 75 to 80%, every one of them said, I was ready to take my life. I was strongly considering the alternative to take my life. One man even, and he came out of it dramatically, it'd be fun to tell that story someday, but he went into a full-blown manic episode, and the last thing he remembered was, because he felt he had failed his family economically, he was going to kill his wife that he loved dearly, his 9 and 11-year-old sons that he loved dearly, and then himself, so they wouldn't have to suffer the way he was suffering. And that manic episode, Ben, saved 4 people's lives. The other thing it usually does is it usually calls in the cavalry. If you're running around with no clothes on or starting fires in the middle of a major highway, you get attention. The police, the emergency squad, they get you to a place to get you some help and some safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what's coming to me is this, comparison. We've kind of been going back between the physical body and the physical response to stress, right, and the mental body and the mental response to stress. And obviously the physical response is the HPA access stuff, and it's flooding the system and we're degrading our immune system. And I loved the analogy of, touching the stove and, resisting getting burnt. But there is, the inflammatory response is a healing response of the body. It's a natural healing response. And what's coming to me is, similarly, when it comes to our mental health, mental pain and patterns are in place to take care of ourselves mentally.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that someone's patterns of, manic episodes or anxiety or anything like that, how do you see those episodes or those patterns as being an expression of someone's innate mental well-being?
Well, like I said, I see that, to me, that universal mind is trying to come through to keep the person alive until they can get more understanding. It's always trying to help the person survive until they can come to more understanding.
Mhm.
I'll take this to the extreme because I told this story in London a couple of years ago at Big Three Principles conference, and this person said, "That's impossible. That's not what you just said is it's not true. It's impossible." Well, I said, basically, you're calling me a liar. I said, I'm too old to have lies make sense. Maybe when I was younger, sometimes they did. They don't. And the story was 6 months after I met Mr. Banks. And by the way, within 30 minutes of sitting listening to him on April Fool's Day, with all my background, I realized that this welder with a ninth grade education knew 1,000 times more about mental health than I did. That was humbling, but also very hopeful. So let me go back to, I lost my, do you remember my point was? Let's see.
I don't know. I was with you. I was following your thoughts.
Yeah, I apologize.
No problem.
There was something that I wanted to.
We were talking about mental health patterns and mental thought patterns as being an expression of someone's innate mental well-being.
Okay. So 6 months after I'd met Mr. Banks, my life changed. My marriage, I saw my wife with such love, and I saw separate realities. So instead of, when she talked, I didn't immediately start listening to see where she was wrong. I'd listen to try to understand what she saw, because I knew it was different than I saw. And the more I was willing to listen, the bigger my world would get. Because no two people are seeing the same world. And so our relationship started to just get warmer and more loving and more kind. And I saw my father for the first time in my life when we went back to visit him on the way to the East Coast. And I saw him through eyes of unconditional love. And my heart just melted. And he must have felt it, because he told me stories in the next few days that I had never heard in 41 years of being his son. But I know it was because he felt the love and the unconditional love that I felt for him. And so I take a job at this state hospital in my hometown. At the time had 700 patients still, 350 developmentally disabled and 350 acute and chronic mental illness. And this social worker told me that I was full of, when I told him about that everybody had mental well-being, and it was just our thinking that shrouded over that and that covered over our innate mental well-being. And our innate mental well-being was spiritual and therefore could never be even scratched, let alone damaged. He kept telling me I was bullshit, but he kept wanting to go to lunch with me. And he finally, after about 6 weeks, admitted that his anxiety and his panic attacks had subsided, and he was no longer having them. And he was able to try out with his local theater, and he got a leading role in the theater, which he'd wanted to do for 20 years. So he asked me then to come and be a co-group leader in his group, with a group of about 22 people that had the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia. And I'm talking to them like I'm talking to you, only I didn't maybe have the same level. I don't know. But I was talking to them like I'm talking to you. And the third session, there was this man, I'm going to call him Herb. And Herb had been there. He was 68 years old or 67 years old. He'd been there since he was 20 years old. Maybe a couple of times out of the hospital, didn't last very long. 47 years in the state hospital. He's talking to voices. His chair is askew. I'm talking to the whole group like I'm talking to you. Now, this didn't happen to all 22 people, Ben. I don't know why and how, but on the third time I was there with this psychologist that wanted me to co-thing and said, go ahead, talk about this stuff. This man started suddenly laughing. Not a normal ha ha ha. Have you ever been around somebody that starts laughing and their belly and their eyes are watering and you're laughing too and you have no idea? You're begging them to stop, right?
Yeah, it's a healing crisis.
It's a healing crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he starts laughing like that. And all 22 of those people that have this diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia, and myself and the psychologist, involuntary, we were all laughing, holding our stomach, our eyes watering, begging Herb to stop. What is so funny? Herb, what is so funny? Okay? This is when you wish, I hope we come back.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
frozen right now. You okay?
Yeah. You can repeat
This
that.
is when you wish that somebody, this is when you wish, Ben, that somebody was surreptitiously filming you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where's the NSA when you need them?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So this is 1983. This is, so this is like July or August or September. So anyway, so he stops after, I don't know, it seemed like it went on for 7 to 10 minutes. It just went on and on. And I'll do this short because of the time we have, but I'll give the short version. If we have a time sometime, I'll be glad to tell you the whole version. But I said to him, Herb, I said, you got to tell us what was so funny. I waited till he'd wiped his eyes and he was breathing normal. And he picked up his chair, Ben, and he put it in the circle for the first time. And he sat in it and he looked across to me, which is probably 15 feet, maybe 15 to 18 feet. And he looked me right in the eyes. I even as I think about it, it's touching. He said, Doctor, as you were talking, I suddenly realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. That would be huge. I mean, that was huge. But then he saw something that I hadn't seen immediately. I had hope for this second part, but he saw it. He said, and I don't have to do it anymore. Ben, I tell you, the intellect, the personal intellect is, personal use of mind is a funny thing, because I had thoughts like, damn, I don't mind helping people, but this is over the top. This is over the top. I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, well, I would love to. That's amazing. And I know that's just one of hundreds of examples that you could share. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't know that I have hundreds that dramatic.
Yeah.
I've got a number that are real dramatic.
But I'm curious to know from your perspective, having been in this really focused field of psychiatry, specifically from a 3 principles perspective, what is the magic potion that allowed that individual to arrive at that insight in that moment?
Okay.
If you could wrap it up, like, just like focus in on the.
Yeah. And now I think for a lot of people, when I give the answer, their intellect will say that's too simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's 2 parts to it. Number one, it has to be there all the time. It had to have been, his mental well-being had to still be in there.
Right. It wasn't just outside of him for 47 years and
it was inside of him.
Yeah.
It was always there. But it was shrouded and held prisoner by his thinking. And if he's made of divine wisdom, if he is divine energy like all of us are, once there was a pause there, he heard something, that truth meter that we talked about at the beginning. That truth meter got triggered that allowed him to let go of his grip on his thinking for just a moment. And I always tell people mental well-being is looking to rear its ugly head any moment, if you give it even a little bit of space. Mm-hmm. For him, it came through totally, to where I literally had to, he was on a huge number of medicines, but he was no longer creating the same biochemical dysregulation. He immediately stopped the hyperactivation of the HPA axis, to where I had to taper him off those medicines one at a time as fast as I could because of the horrible side effects he started having from those medicines. Mm-hmm. because they were now foreign bodies in his
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just want to ask one more thing on this
Sure.
scenario.
Sure.
So do you feel like from your experience and how you were showing up with that individual in that moment, do you feel that you played any role in that, you know, experience that he had, the healing experience? And if so,
Absolutely.
what was your role?
My role was, if you and I are walking down the road at dusk, or a light fog, okay,
Mm.
and you see something, Ben, you say, "Oh my gosh, look at that windmill up there, that old windmill up on the hill." And I say, "Ben, I don't see it." And you say, "Well, it's at about 10:30 on the clock, if 12 is straight ahead, and it's up on a hill, so it's up about 100 feet from our eye level." Well, if you're pointing at it, right? Now, if I keep looking at your finger, I'm not going to see what you're pointing at. That's why Sid says, "Don't listen to my words, because my words are like my finger."
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to point to something. So the role that I had, I believe, was I was pointing to the windmill. I was pointing to the well-being that was inside of him. I was at least pointing to asking him to consider that it existed, and that it was inside of him. And I even described what it was like. Instead of a windmill, it's, you know, brown. I can say that it's not damaged. It's in totally well. It has feelings of love connected to it, feelings of calm, feelings of peace. I'm pointing to something, and because everybody has the eyes to see that, which is already there. See, to me, Herb is just one end of a spectrum I think I told you this story, and I can do it quickly, of the lady in her 50s that came in that was full of depression and anxiety. She rated both of them an 8 or a 9 out of 10. But she said, "When I'm puzzled, because when my grandchildren come over, they make me happy for 2 hours." And I
They
think
make me happy.
they
Yeah.
make me happy. And I
Yeah.
told her that wasn't fair to blame
That's
her
not,
grandchildren.
yeah, that's not fair.
I said, "That's not fair to blame your grand." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's not their fault." She said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "What happens is when your grandchildren come over, being present in the present moment of your life, the only thing that exists, becomes more important than holding on and paying attention to your negative thinking and your negative beliefs and your
Yeah.
negative thoughts." And so what happened for Grandma
Yeah.
is the same thing that happened for Herb.
Yeah. That, I feel like that needs to be digested by
Yes.
everybody listening right now, including myself. You know, that is the nutshell that needs to
That's
be cracked and, you know,
yeah,
taken in, is
yeah,
that we are constantly distracted. Not, you know, not all of us, obviously, but
right.
that is what dis-ease is being
Yeah.
distracted from the present moment.
We innocently create disease,
Yeah.
and then we look for things externally to try to, whether it's food, sex, power, drugs,
Yeah.
alcohol, OC
So,
rituals.
yeah. So, you know, in attempts to kind of wrap it up
Sure,
here, I'd
sure,
love to
sure.
know, and obviously we could have a, you know, round two at some point, but I'd love to know some tips and tools that you like to support people with, like your clients in your experience. Are there exercises? Is this some place where meditation helps? Like, you know, like how do people practice this?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just, where you're asking that question from is so foreign to me
Well,
that
you know, I conceptually understand. Yes, it's in every moment. All I have to do is be
right.
present. But at the same time, I know that that's not as accessible maybe for
Okay.
every human. You know, it's like how, but there's a process to come present. So what's the,
What's the process?
yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to listen, and those that are listening to just listen as quietly as you can,
Yeah.
and thank your brain for sharing its comments, because your brain, your personal intellect is going to probably go, yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. Okay. What about, yeah, but, what about this case? Okay. So what's different about this understanding is that the only thing that's needed is incremental understanding related to the spiritual nature of these principles. That's all there is. That's the only goal when I talk to people, is to point to a deeper understanding of these principles. And all it takes for people's lives to change, their relationships, their ability to deal things financially, their creativity, everything that people are looking for, as their understanding of the principles deepens, they are more in tune with that wisdom that they're made of. And so they live more, I guess in Buddha's term, they spend more of their hours of life awake and less asleep. Right? Didn't the Buddha say we fall asleep and then we wake up? We fall asleep. Sid said that. We fall asleep and we wake up. It's part of the human condition. But it's one thing in your waking hours to spend 94% of it awake and 6% asleep, than the opposite of 94% asleep and 6% awake.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that as people's understanding of the principles deepens, that's all they, they may meditate, they may not, but you really are going towards living in a meditative state. I've had people, sadly, that were spending 6 to 8 hours a day in upsetting thinking, worry, guilt, resentment, upset because of their lack of understanding, and then having to spend up to 2 to 3 hours a day in mindfulness meditation and yoga and exercise to try to relieve, after the fact, the tension and stress and dis-ease that they had innocently created. Is that resonate as true?
Yeah, from what I'm hearing you say, it's the yoga, the mindfulness practices, the meditation, it's never going to erase the negative thinking. That, if you're awake 12 hours of the day and you're negative thinking for 6 hours of the day, and then you meditate for an hour, you only have 5 more hours of the day to, maybe in the best case scenario, you'll be in a lightened mood for 5 hours of the day. But what about the 6 hours of the day of negative thinking?
Right. Whereas if you gain a new level of understanding, I had one lady who, when she came to me, she said her last visit at the clinic and I left Adrian, Michigan, and I still do clinics 2 mornings a week back in Adrian, telepsychiatry. But she said she probably, and I looked back on the records, and she admitted to 10 to 12 hours a day of stressful thinking, of activating that stress response. When she left her last visit with me, she said probably 7 to 10 minutes.
Wow.
And she said that all 10 diagnoses that I had been labeled with for years, I no longer have. None of them. None of them.
Just as a natural byproduct of being present.
Exactly. With a light, loving heart. And she said, I feel a love for my husband that I never thought I could experience anywhere close to this with another human being. I feel a love for my children, the vast, vast percentage of the time, I never dreamt I could have. But why? Because, like Sid always says, the most selfless thing you can do is to become selfish about having peace of mind. Because if you are living in a lighthearted, joyful, loving, peaceful place, you have all your resources available, not only for your life, for productivity. It's not that you sit around contemplating your navel. You have all of your energy and your ability, and you have plenty to give to others. He said, I can only give what I have. If you come to me and you need $20 and I only have one, that's all I can give you. If you come to me and you need something from me, but I'm so stressed out, I'm like somebody trying to keep themselves afloat in the water and not drowned, I'm probably not going to be able to give a whole lot to you. Not because I don't want to. See, I would say that person still has love in their heart and they go, God, I want to be, but I'd say if I don't have understanding, my whole life is about surviving. Mm. I don't know if we talked about Corey Keyes' research. Mm-mm. Corey Keyes is he's written a number of articles. You can pull them up. I've got them. I've read the abstracts. I haven't read the whole thing. He's a Seligman, what do you call it? Positive psychology researcher. He's researched, and I'll do this quickly. He's researched throughout the United States. I don't know if he's gone outside the country. All levels of economic, cultural, all levels of educational. And he's got this thing that you fill out, and it falls into 3 sections. Now, within each of the 3 sections, there's, quartiles. I mean, there's a range, right? But the top one is thriving. People in the United States that are thriving, that are in a good state of mental health, high level of stress resistance, where they don't even take on stress to things. And when they do have it, they have a high level of resilience. They bounce back even from significant losses, financial, physical, da-da-da-da. And then there's I'm okay, but I'm stressed. I'm okay, but I'm significantly stressed. And then there's the languishing. People that are overwhelmed the vast majority of the time. And the lower parts are each day fighting whether to take somebody else's life or their own. The statistics were 18% thriving, 50% stressed, significantly stressed but okay, 32% languishing. Dr. Tom Kelly from Wayne State thought to himself after he's got 23 peer-reviewed articles comparing mindfulness, by the way, in the 3 principles understanding. But he decided, and it's not pure research, but he took centers where there's a lot of people that have learned the 3 principles in London, in San Jose, California, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he got about 200 people. They averaged 9.4 years of exposure to the principles. 88% thriving, not 18, 88%, 9% stressed, 3% languishing. What would the world be like, Ben, if we had 88% of the people in the world thriving?
Yeah.
It'd be a different world. It'd be a different world. I tell people, I say, what if your extended family had 88% of people thriving?
Yeah.
What if your county? What if your city? What if your state? What if your country? What if the world?
I believe we're heading in that direction. I think we're slowly waking our eyes up and kind of seeing the truth. And the amazing kind of paradoxical thing always to me is that it's not seeing something, it's not seeing, it's unseen stuff, right? It's not adding anything, it's taking away the negative thinking.
Yeah, so you can see clearly what is.
Yeah.
Sid says that negative thoughts are like scratches on the window that keep you from seeing the beauty of life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap up. And I really, really am grateful for this time shared today. And I know it's just the start of my, unraveling of my knowing or unknowing of life. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom, your time, your energy with us. And until next time, peace and love.
Been delightful.
Yeah.